Welcome to another episode of the Untech podcast. My name is David, and with me is Jordan Rising. Jordan, we are going to have the most clickbaity title ever for this episode. I can't wait. We're going to have the surprised face, on the YouTube thumbnail, and people can't help but click on it. We are calling it UIs Are Dead. GUIs Are Dead. Or some other clickbaity name. But we're talking about user interfaces, and particularly the user interfaces of the future. All of this prompted by a tweet that you sent me, and that was the hot take. The hot take was that GUIs are dead. If you're investing time into making a user interface for your app, you're wasting your time. The future is AI. The future is agents. We'll throw it up on screen here, but what's your overarching thoughts, Jordan? Are GUIs dead? Are they over? Should I stop worrying about Figma and design and we just go full on agentic AI and throw everything away?
Well, October 2025, the theme, this week in particular, but I swear all year has been on obviously agentic stuff. Like that has been, everyone's got
every week.
Every week there's something. So this week was no different, and this week was like particularly news filled. So there was news from OpenAI. They released a couple new, I don't know if you'd call it, they're actually just more applications than they are like libraries or standards or anything. So they released a few things which we're going to talk about in a bit. We have new protocols by people like Cloudflare who are trying to take the agent experience, especially around MCP tools, and they're trying to kind of massage it a bit to make it a little less painful. So it got us thinking, as we're in the midst of building our version of what an agentic experience would look like, what we should be focused on, what we should be thinking about. And that's what kind of spurred this. I don't know what camp we're in, if we're camp UIs are dead or long live the UI, but it's
Long
definitely
UI.
at the You're going to be the old guy telling his kids that, you used to,
Back in my day,
Figma.
Figma. Yep, Figma.
Yep.
What was the Adobe version? Before Figma came onto the scene, Adobe had XD.
XD, yeah.
Yeah,
we were told that we should be using XD, and Figma at that point was like, I don't know if bleeding edge is the right word, but it was definitely the newcomer at that time. But we started using Figma, and we got a lot of backlash for that, I remember. And I was never good at Figma to begin with, so it didn't matter what I used.
I could draw a really good rectangle, though.
Yeah.
So we have this tweet. It's from, oh man, I'm going to butcher this name, Liad Yosef. Anyways, he's an AI lead at Shopify, so he is obviously maybe a little bit biased on the AI side. But we'll throw it up on the screen. He basically says the thoughts about the future of UI that excite him. Complex web interfaces are dead in the long term. That's all human perception limitations. And he says personal agents will win over dedicated app agents. The new front end will be UI snippets that will be returned from MCP servers, which that is very interesting considering how MCP is changing so quickly, like you said. And then he said, number 4, if you're thinking there's no way I'm giving up my pretty dashboards, you're thinking like a project manager, not like the president, which I don't know why we should be thinking like the president, but apparently he doesn't use dashboards, and he has
It's a weird analogy.
Yeah, he has helpers to look at him for him. He doesn't need to know information. He can just digest and take for granted whatever people tell him. So visualization is really only a way of answering questions and make sure you're not missing anything. So he's saying this is going to happen faster than you think. And then he quotes Jira, which in my mind was
Jira.
Jira.
Okay,
wait,
well, I'm not moving on. This happens to us frequently too with the Jira. We moved to San Diego a handful of years ago.
Oh gosh.
And so for reference, most people don't know much about us, nor should you want to, but we're from the Midwest and, Montana. We moved down to California, and our first meeting that we had was in El Cajon. So what did 2 people from Montana say? Like, we have a meeting in El Cajun. So we got
Via de la Via. I still almost call it wrong. Via de la Val. VALLE.
What's the beach? Like the main downtown. La Jolla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
La Jolla.
Yeah. But anyway, Jira, not Jira. And
Is it Jira?
I'm probably wrong about that.
Okay, we're down this rabbit hole now. Jira, they are owned by the same company that just bought Arc browser, right? The browser
Yeah.
company.
Yeah,
What? Who?
that Altassian.
Yeah, Atlassian, Altassian, whatever they're called. we
Yeah.
we could spend the entire episode debating various names. But now that's an interesting segue into this conversation. So they're saying that UI is dead, and they're
Mhm.
saying that everybody's just going to interact with an agent in the future. So Jira, owned by Atlassian, whatever it is, they bought Arc browser, or they bought the browser company. And now here's another hot take, because both you and I have debated browsers and what internet browser to use forever. And we both
Yeah.
loved Arc browser back in the day. Rest in peace. It was an awesome browser. And then they just completely shifted to do exactly what we're talking about. They went to the Dia browser, Dia, whatever. We're going to just keep butchering names, boldly
Mhm.
butcher names.
As we do.
And the Dia browser we both hated. And their whole idea of the Dia browser was that everybody's just going to want to chat with an AI agent in the browser, and you're not going to want to type in URLs. You're not going to want to read things. You're just going to use AI for your web browsing. I don't know where I was going with that, other than in our experience, that was an awful user experience. Never used the AI there. I only ever went back to my typical, I use Raycast with their AI agents, but I never used Dia for that. So, I mean, with that in mind, what do you think is for maybe we break it down into various sectors, like a consumer product versus a like data product? For a browser, are we ever going to get to a point where you're just using an AI agent? You're not even going to websites. You're just asking in an LLM, "Hey, give me my flights, give me my news." You know,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it'd be foolish to be like kind of put your foot down and say that this won't happen or this will happen, because everything in time could obviously progress there. I think the consideration though is, is that a reasonable thing to do today? And for that I say no, because you mentioned Dia. I call it Dia, not Dia, by the way. I'm pretty sure it's Dia. But I stopped using that, and I specifically stopped using the chat part of it because it's nothing that Dia did wrong, but have you ever heard of Comet? So they're also a AI in the browser thing by Perplexity. They had a huge security issue. So they basically, I actually don't remember what happened. I don't think it was a prompt injection, but something to where the LLM had context of your page without you actually interacting with the chat. So the way these AI in the browsers work typically is you go to a tab or, a page, and then you'll talk to your chat, your widget on the side, your side loader or your sidecar, and be like, hey, break this down, give me a summary of this page or of my financials or whatever. And usually, or the expectation is that LLM is not being invoked or activated unless you're chatting with it. So what happened with Comet, and hopefully I'm right about this, is that the LLM had context even when you weren't chatting with it. So just the whole time when you were like going to random tabs and stuff. So you can
just
imagine
Big
this is,
Brother watching your browsing.
yeah. So, I mean, think of going to your banking app or your banking, dashboard or any of these things. And I don't know if there would ever be considerations for, keystroke monitoring or stuff like that. You have passwords and all that stuff. But obviously, it just points that there are flaws with it now. And so even if I were to ignore the flaws of that, I still don't understand it all that much from a UX perspective. Like, I didn't get all that much benefit from it. Like, I didn't really understand when I would turn to the browser's AI instead of just that AI that I use for everything else, like
Right.
Gemini or ChatGPT or Claude. I have those apps, and yeah, I got to copy and paste the URL in, but that friction wasn't enough to where using a browser AI was, oh my gosh, this is amazing. That never today, or like as of, October 2025, that wasn't my experience yet.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting consideration too, of like everybody's like, "Oh, well, I could book a flight." And the interesting thing though
Oh,
is
it
it's
takes
like,
forever.
yeah, and it's like I can go to Google Flight and I can type in, I'm in Redmond to Kalispell. I can type
Hmm.
that in within 10 seconds or 5 seconds. Or it is not you're not solving a problem that is particularly challenging. And maybe that is tying it back into this tweet. Maybe that's kind of
Yep.
the limit of it. Of he's saying complex web interfaces are dead in the long term, and I think the problem maybe with a lot of current or contemporary solutions, and I see, I mean, here's another big AI announcement that came out this week, Sora 2, or end of last week, the video stuff, and everybody talking about slop and how it's not really progressing AI, it's just kind of a gimmick, just a video gimmick. And I feel like sometimes, or a lot of these releases have kind of been that way. Like they're solving problems that don't really exist, or they're trying to claim efficiencies that aren't really inefficiencies to begin with. Like going to
Mhm.
Google Flights does not take me very long. And if anything, the AI takes longer to get a flight than Google Flights does. So you're not like solving this massive issue that I have of like, how do I find a flight? It's like, no, there's already 50 different websites that can find me a flight. I don't need AI to do it for me. I'm just as
Because
fast doing it
you're
myself.
because we're basically, I think what it comes down to is AI is trying to solve problems that it wasn't designed to solve. It was designed for a human to solve, right? So like all the UIs and applications, complex applications and all these things were designed for how we would interact with them. So you're kind of, you know, creating this AI or this agent in the middle to try to solve a problem that like not all that, it's not that great at doing for one, but it's really not designed for that. So I think that's where if we were to kind of flip the coin here and maybe look at it from how could this work, it's when you think of applications, the applications you're using today taking a different shape, exposing whether it's their functionality in a different way, whether it's a different API layer. Microsoft has this proposal, I think it was earlier this summer or spring, and hopefully this is the right one I'm looking at. I Googled it right before we started, NL Web, but hopefully this is the right one. But basically what that said is it's a proposal for changing how you basically expose a conventional, website or app to LLMs. So it knows how to use that app in a standardized way. Just kind of like how MCP is trying to standardize tool calling and OpenAI in a lot of ways standardize the APIs for how you query for chats and send chats and all that stuff. They have kind of this OpenAI standard for how you interact with chats, and most providers use that. This NL Web is kind of trying to do that same thing for the web. The same way, I mean, HTML kind of did it in a sense, right? So I think if you had that level of interoperability, we would have different experiences though.
Hmm. And that's interesting, like building in then, more complex workflows. So, maybe it's not just like, oh, I'm going to look for a flight or I'm going to, buy a pair of sneakers. Because, I mean, OpenAI, again, they had all of their e commerce stuff. So you can, like, on ChatGPT, say, hey, I want to go buy something. And now you can buy it right in ChatGPT, which, again, I mean, that's cool. Um, but it's doing something very similar to what Google already did, which is Google
Hmm.
Shop. So it's like I can do the same thing already. It's kind of reinventing the wheel again. Um, but as it relates to more complex things, and maybe the example that this guy gives is, as we said, Jira, whatever it is, a project management app that is like orders of magnitude more difficult. You're managing timelines. You're asking for status updates. Maybe you're can I send a Slack message to this person on what's the status of this? Like suddenly this is a much more complex thing and a much more complex user interface where you're like digging 5, 6 menus deep, to get an answer to something. What do
Okay.
you think kind of the application would be in that? Like leaving aside the easy straw mans of kind of dumb solutions for AI, in this more complex world, how do you kind of see it interacting with the user interface there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. And I think it kind of comes full circle to what we said when we started, because OpenAI had announcements this week. So we'll talk about those here right now. But in addition to that, there's, new ways of dealing with MCP, like we mentioned as well. But I'm actually going to take your question and use it to launch into the OpenAI stuff because I think it's slightly applicable to what you were saying. Because their whole goal with what they're, I mean, yeah, I guess you can call them apps. So they have two different things that they really released. They have this new apps SDK, and then they have, was it Agent Kit? Is that what they're calling it? So apps SDK basically allows you to use, various apps within ChatGPT, kind of like you mentioned a few minutes ago here. And then the agent kit is their drag and drop. If you've seen Make or N8N or GeoFlow, hopefully, it's very similar to that, but it's obviously for agentic experiences. Like you're not doing things outside of agent workflows really. But the reason it's interesting, or that at least we found it interesting, is that it's very opinionated because you're not going to use AgentKit with an Anthropic model, right? You're not going to use AgentKit with a Gemini model. So it does have probably the most kind of like handcuffing type of experience you'll get in this. And when I first saw this, when I was reading the blog, I was like, oh, this is cool. But if you're going to put that much faith into something, I mean, you're going to be signing up, I mean, pretty tightly with OpenAI. I mean, because you're designed, or this is designed to build complex and fairly feature rich experiences. You're not going to just pick that up and walk away from it easily. I mean,
Well, I
there's
mean,
not really.
yeah, we were texting about that when it came out of like, if you built all of your workflows in AgentKit with ChatGPT, you are like, you're vendor locked to the max. Like all of your automations rely on them and their frontier models. So whatever they decide to bill you, like
Mhm.
I mean, you can't, how are you ever going to like go to an open source model after that? Or how are you going to, Anthropic comes out with something super lightweight and easy. Like you couldn't just hop from one model to the next. It's, you're locked into whatever pricing they put on you. And like, I mean, there's a decent amount of development effort that would go into like creating all those workflows. And
I wonder if they're trying to get to the point, because the industry has kind of assumed this, and I think there's probably a lot of truth in it, is that there's a lot of these large LLM providers like OpenAI and Anthropic, where the LLMs for the longest time has been like a loss leader for them, right? Like they're building a following around it. They're getting people to recognize the value in LLMs, but they did like inference for them costs a lot of money. Like people complain about their $20, $30 a month, ChatGPT Pro or whatever it's called, things. But I don't think that these providers are necessarily like making it rich right now. But eventually their investors are gonna want to make some money. And I think stuff like this is probably an attempt to do that because again, it's an opinionated way to get people to use their platform and, likely start paying more money than they have in the past. So it's kind of my interpretation of what's going on here with this, but definitely could be wrong there.
yeah, I think it brings a interesting question up too of like, if you're N8N or somebody like that, or a make.com or all of these other kind of node or GeoFlow, node orchestration libraries, like I feel like that's almost again, you don't have the kind of penetration or the market kind of following that a chat GPT does, but your agnosticism to the market in general, I feel like is a really powerful place to be because you know, people can use any model versus the
Hmm.
such an opinionated. Like I mean, I was looking at all the companies that ChatGPT put in their marketing. There's like Ramp.com, the financial thing, and Rippling, and all these kind of trendy companies. And if I was one of those, I'd be like, why would I choose to be, outside of the marketing and probably being paid to be a featured sponsor or whatever on their in ChatGPT's marketing. But if I wasn't that, like, why would I choose such an opinionated model versus, something more open source like an N8N, where it's like, I know that I won't be locked into, some sort of super expensive plan down the road after I've invested all my resources and time and training employees and whatever into, this kind of frontier model, this singular person, like a
Mhm.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, and yeah, because you almost want to stay pretty agnostic if you're an end provider. Like you're a service at the way end that's being invoked, like you said. Because that's Roastify. So we have Roastify that we own, which is a coffee kind of, what do you call it, drop shipping, fulfilling center type
White
thing.
label
We kind of
provider, yeah.
white label 3PL thing. I don't even know what we call it. But we were thinking about all this as it relates to Roastify, because I mean, if you could use an agent experience, whether that was, OpenAI or, let's flash forward months in the future or years in the future where you have your own personal agent and you could order coffee or buy stuff, maybe it's using the Roastify API, maybe it's a completely different protocol. But as a provider, I think that only benefits us, right? Because it's another sales channel for us. We can reduce the friction to get people to customize coffee. I mean, if they could design and create really cool things using an agent in an LLM experience, I mean, that only benefits us because we've been toying around with building our own version of agents and designers and LLM type stuff. But every time we get a little into the weeds with it, because we've done that a few times now, and every time we get into the weeds with it, we feel like we get bottlenecked by something. And to get past that bottleneck would require a pretty big sacrifice. And it would introduce, I don't know, we'd almost be like on an island a little bit, and it'd be hard for us to kind of like keep up with industry that's moving so quickly. So we've kind of taken the approach of almost waiting for this, call it, storm to weather a little bit and see where all the pieces fall, and then try to like slot ourselves in where it makes a lot of sense. But being really early to market with a lot of these doesn't, especially when they're changing so quickly, we almost feel that it has more risk and potential negatives than we could see on the positive side.
Yeah, and maybe that's an interesting distinction. Like, going back to this tweet, kind of the second point you had, personal agents for people like, they're going to turn to a chat GPT or they're going to turn to a Claude or an Anthropic or whatever. And like, that's the one they always use. Like most people, what did chat GPT say or OpenAI? They said they had like 800 million or 600 million or something
Mhm.
users, like some ridiculous amount of users. Um, and so somebody turning to there and saying, hey, I want to order custom coffee, a great user experience would be that ChatGPT then returns, hey, you can use Roastify. Would you like me to help you design, according to their packaging? And then you could design the packaging using ChatGPT's, image models. And then once you have the packaging designed the way you want it, you can place an order right through that chat interface. And rather than going to, search in ChatGPT, get a result, then you come to Roastify, and then you're trying to use Roastify's agent. And, and that's exactly what this guy is saying in this tweet. Like,
Mhm.
people don't want to go from one large language model to another, to another, to another, just to accomplish a task if it can all happen in one place. So maybe on the like more consumer side, that is the answer in the future, is that, UIs, I mean, look at even like a TikTok or some of the like kind of social media apps, like, people are trying to like landing page design off of a TikTok it's all just so focused on, can you get a conversion in like 2 seconds or one
Mhm.
second or like half a second. Like the attention span is so small that like you have so little time. Nobody wants to scroll your super long landing page. Nobody wants to like do a super long checkout flow. Like, for a consumer based product or solution, seemingly, yeah, that is a pretty good take of like, nobody wants to deal with your, custom agent necessarily. They want it
Right.
to fit into what they're already using and just be super seamless there.
Yeah, because I mean, the tweet says no one will browse to 4 different websites to use 4 different agents. I mean, how many times have you gone to, I don't know, what service, Amazon, and tried to use their AI thing, and you're just like, why? But maybe it's good. I don't know. I don't use it. And but then you go to a different app and maybe you love their agent experience and that's all you use. Or, a customer service thing, whatever it ends up being.
Oh,
But
I have a great example of this. Our accounting software, we use Zero. They just came out with Jax, Jax, their AI thing that you can ask questions about your books and it'll give you back answers. And it is the worst experience. It is
right.
awful. Like I would never in a million years use it. It is so bad. It can't give you any answers on anything, even though it has all the data right there. Like it should be able to.
Right.
It is absolutely useless. I would much rather download a CSV and upload it to ChatGPT. Like, great
Yeah.
example. That was,
But
yeah.
that polarizing nature is kind of like why it's difficult because you'll have maybe a great experience, or whenever I think of agents, my default is always using the agents in a code editor, right? Which that experience is fantastic. I mean, that is
So
so
good.
good. Like they the difference between when Copilot first came out, I mean, what was this, 2022, and it was basically tab completion. That's what Copilot was. And then you kind of could bring it into a chat and you could do a little bit more. And then it wasn't until a year or two later, I don't know when exactly, but then they started to kind of build out the more agent style code editor, or the code agents. And that experience it's hard to believe you could never go back. You could never go back to just tab completion. Like that is so good. And that's ignoring how good is a LLM for coding and stuff like that. That's kind of ignoring like the quality of the output, just mostly talking to the user experience and like, do you enjoy using it more than anything, versus your zero, type of experience. But yeah, well, when you can have one place that you can go, your own personal agent, and you know what that experience is going to be like. You know what that interface is, maybe not a UI in this case, but that interface of how you talk with it or chat with it or whatever you're doing is a known, it's a known thing to you, and it's predictable and reliable. That will be very different than this whole like quote unquote faster horses solution.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think, I mean, on like a user by user kind of like consumer basis, I think I would agree that UIs, like, again, I wish there was a way that I could just go to ChatGPT, that they would have all of the information from our books for, again, using the accounting, you know, uh, example, and it would be able to return intelligent answers. And that's not far off. And there are actually, AI based accounting platforms. I wouldn't use them because they're not robust and they're changing so quickly. Like it's too early to adopt those kind of like whole suite. But, um, as a consumer product, that would be fantastic. But, um, where I would maybe disagree, and that's maybe kind of going to is like points 3 and 4, is where the complexity, rises. Or like,
Mhm.
you think of like GIS, or you think of um, more complex workflows that are based on data where, a one shot approach just is not going to work. Like you're not going to just go to ChatGPT and say, hey, process this LiDAR file for me and you know, return something. Like it is too complex of a workflow to have a one shot kind of LLM interface that does it with any reasonable amount of confidence, at least right now. But I would say that in my mind is maybe where it breaks down, or the example breaks down, and things like a node orchestration library or something like that, where you can chain together things in a user interface makes more sense. But
Mhm. Yeah, I did see it was also a clickbaity title, but is Agents Kit, or the OpenAI one, the N8N killer. I literally saw a video on that this morning. But to what you just said, my initial knee jerk was like, well, how? Because there are things that you can do in N8N that obviously you're not going to be able to do in the OpenAI solution anytime soon, whether it's getting things from like webhooks or scheduling and all that type of stuff. Sure, they might have that someday. They don't now, but the way they're tying in different data sources, the way they're tying in different, applications, or, the ways you can self-host it, you can spin it up, with your own models. You can, spin it up with self-hosted models. So it hits a security and privacy level that obviously you're certainly not going to get with OpenAI right now. So it'd be interesting to see if those things continue to develop, though, like because OpenAI does have open source models. They have their GPT OSS models, 20 billion version and a 12 billion parameter version, and I don't remember what the other one is, 60 or is it 12, something like that. But so if this worked with the open source versions, that'd be pretty neat. But who knows?
yeah, yeah, no, it's interesting to think. And I guess the last part of it is almost more of a little bit like, I don't know, philosophical a bit, where you like, I mean, he uses the U.S. president example, which is kind of silly. But again, like will we outsource the analysis of data? And again, this relates to everything from engineering to GIS to, I mean, talking about accounting. It relates to accounting too, but will we outsource some of the analytical parts of this and then just take the I guess the AI analysis and make decisions off of it? Are we going to get to the point where like you upload, say, again, to use examples we know, a LiDAR data set, and it's just going to return to you like, here's all the polls with Geo 95 infractions. Go fix these. And it goes straight from you flew a LiDAR flight, or well, let's use a real futuristic example. Your drone in a box flew a LiDAR flight, came back, uploaded to S3, which kicked off a workflow that processed the LiDAR data, analyzed all of the polls against Geo 95 in California, and found all the infractions, and then sent you a Slack notification that said, here's a map of all the issues, and here's what those issues are. And it sends to work construction crew to go and fix them. Like, do we get there? Do we trust that? Yep. I don't know.
It seems that right now, at least the attempts, anything that resembles that because even the OpenAI one, the agents kit, has a node called man in the middle or needs approval. I don't remember what they call it, but I think that's the way it's going to continue to progress. Is you're going to give more and more automation, you're going to get more and more autonomy, but you're going to find very strategic points to inject yourself or to inject an expert of some sort, right? So, if what you said was as easy as kind of how you made it sound, where you can fly a drone in the box, fly these polls, it does its, upload to S3, kicks off a workflow, does all that. Like if that happened, there would definitely be a point to where you'd want, man in the middle for, like an approval stage where somebody's going through maybe opening that data set and making sure that that set of palm trees that got noted as a poll is, not flagging a Geo 95 infraction. But could you get to like a 95% or a 98% or, 100% maybe a lot of times, but you'll still need that man in the middle in that sense. Almost in the same way. Again, when I think of agents, I think of coding. And if I want to make an algorithm, it's really good. If I give it a really defined set of, if I can even give it type definitions, it does amazing, right? This is what I have. These are the types that are coming into this. And here's the types that I want returned. I have an object that's coming in and I want it to return an array of strings, whatever. I give it that context, a very specific context, and give it context around the problem. It does an amazing job. But if you give it too much, or you give it too much context, you have the classic LLM problem of too much context, right? But I feel like that's been my experience with coding in general, where I'll have some kind of deployment issue, or I got this very vague error in the console, and the stack trace is about as helpful as it not even existing in the first place. And it goes to troubleshoot that, and it goes down this rabbit trail that's 10 miles deep. And then you're like, well, no, because my server's on Docker and I'm working in local hosts. So those two can't talk, or it can't, and it's like, it missed that one small nugget of context that sent it down not days, but if you would let it would have been days, of this just crazy hallucinating, I'm going to solve your problem, and trying everything, including rewriting your entire code base. When if you could have been like, you can't use the ports like that or the addresses like that because they don't have context of each other, solved, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And that brings up an interesting question of like, what does it take to get that additional 5 or 2, or it's the thing that we've always said, like, for classifying your point cloud.
I was
Cool,
hoping you'd bring that up.
Oh yeah, 95% of it is great, and you're like, wow, that's awesome. But then there's like 5 points on, like you said, a palm tree, or there's a weird, line classification out in the middle of a forest. You're like, why is that there? And you have to go through, but it did that all across the entire data set. So you have to go through the entire data set to find where it had that 2% or 8%. And you have to use all of the legacy tools to do it. And so rather than a efficient workflow where it's like, it's very procedural, we go through the steps and we know at the end it's going to be perfect. It's like, well, here is 95%, and I can't tell you where the 5% went wrong. Good luck.
Right. Well, I think what most people don't realize about, hopefully this is a tangent people care to hear about, but the AI classification for point clouds, when you quantify it as 90% accurate or 95% accurate, what you're not doing is weighing it properly. So when you take, let's say you have a data set of 1 billion points, okay? And you say that it's 95% accurate, what percentage of that billion points is vegetation? What percentage
Yep.
of that, of that data set is ground? Those things that will always will almost be right or right enough to where it doesn't matter, right?
Well, I
But
mean,
when
there's
you talk,
algorithms that can do those pretty much accurately without AI. Like, you
right,
almost don't
right,
need AI
exactly,
for those.
for sure. But when you consider the parts of that data set that, so when we say these, we're almost always talking about the electric utilities because the electric utilities are a really good example because it's just, it's, I would say one of the higher bars of point classification as far as the difficulty goes and the requirement for precision and or accuracy. So we're always in the back of our minds, we're always thinking electric utilities with these examples. But again, that 95% of that data set being accurate via AI or machine learning classification, that data set, what percentage of those points are of core infrastructure? So are wires or poles or cross arms, a percent at that? I don't know what the number is, right? But it's an incredibly small, I mean, you have thousands of points that are a tree, a single tree or a building or a house, right? But how many of those points are of the core infrastructure? And then if you were to weigh that and say you had some weighing scale where you weighed what's important to you as a percent of that total data set versus the accuracy, it would probably be standardized to its accuracy is 50%, right? Or I'm making up numbers here, but hopefully it articulates the point that just grossly quantifying something as 95% accurate is extremely misleading. And it's why it almost drives me insane when I see these marketing claims of accuracy and stuff like that, because I'm like, yes, you're not wrong, but you're also not right. With a huge asterisk is what it should almost have. So this is my
But
soapbox apparently. So
marketers don't like asterisks.
no.
Yeah, but I mean, which then to bow tie this whole conversation, at the end, like the visualization, I think that is that again, that's maybe where I disagree. Where I agree is for consumer-based things, an LLM is a great experience for answering simple questions and performing simple tasks. And using the Roastify example is one of them or something like that. But where I disagree is like these more complex tasks where you need a human in the loop kind of interaction. And to make that human in the loop interaction efficient, requires a good user interface. Like if you had, okay, you did AI classification of a point cloud, it went through and it flagged all these things, and then you had a really efficient process for then having like a QC check that some GIS intern, almost could like just go through and they're clicking through and they're pass failing it, or they're, again, that tool set, if they didn't have to go to MicroStation and open TerraSolid and reclassify, go through this painful process, like that's almost just as valuable as the agentic part that did, the front end of the work. Like having a good visual way of completing that task simply is almost just as important in my mind.
Yeah. And I think maybe what you're saying, or maybe what point is it, number point 4 or something like that, they're talking about using MCPs to generate UI. So there is a library out there. It's either UI MCP or MCP UI. It's one of those two. I can't remember what it's called. But the core principle of that is that it's an MCP that returns to you HTML and CSS and JavaScript dynamically based off what you're asking. So if you're like, oh, I want to see all the, let's pretend it's back to kind of an e-commerce type experience, an e-commerce type of agentic experience. And you're like, I want to see all the different types of, coffee options out there. The agent could do what it needs to do to run the queries it needs to run, but it could return to you, HTML or, UI in some fashion that was very specific to what your ask was. So it's maybe like a scrollable set of cards that shows all the products. Nothing more, nothing less, perfectly distilled to what you need to see. Maybe you really care about like, tasting notes or whatever it is, that would be a, part of the card that's highlighted versus, a static UI would have a bunch of stuff you might not care about, or, it would talk about country of origin and all these things. Like, I don't care. I want to find a specific coffee that has these types of things, and it could deliver a UI that is perfectly trying to answer the question that you're asking. So I think I would actually 100% agree with you that UI is extremely important. I think the way it's going to go is that the UI is not going to be static though.
Mm-hmm.
And the UI is going to come in dynamic, and but the UI is, like I said, I agree with you. I think the UI is an incredibly important part. And if we went back to the point cloud examples where we're flagging GO95 infractions, or, maybe you could set that up in some, static UI way where, you're basically clicking a next button to approve or reject its analysis, that human in the loop part. But maybe you have a different request and you're like, I want to look at all the things that were flagged as cross arms, right? And you had just a slight tweak that you ask. Now, having a static UI that had a static camera position that's 50 yards back on the pole that looks at it, it's like, well, I can't see the cross arm at all. Like, if the UI was intelligent, it would zoom in, maybe put the camera to where the cross arm is centered, and it would position the camera appropriately to where I could approve or reject. I don't know what we're approving or rejecting in this example, but that dynamic UI for your exact use case would be, that's what MCP UI is going for. But yeah, I completely agree with you on that one.
Yeah, so I guess is it, bow tying the conversation as it relates to GeoFlow. I think it's interesting, and kind of what we mentioned in past episodes of what we're attempting to do. I think node orchestration fits into this kind of model. Like you were just saying, like, returning a dynamic UI, rather than being, and this relates even to, what we did with Quantiscan and Aura and kind of the visualization there. We're like, this is a great visualization, but we got to solve the back end problems before we get to the visualization in general. Um, and so, kind of our idea with the node orchestration, or, is that then we can be flexible with the visualization and how, whether it's just like, hey, this is a GIS, map, this is a 2D map of infraction areas, or this is a full 3D, map of the actual point cloud, or, allows us to be maybe a little bit more agnostic on the visualization front, and maybe a little bit more dynamic with it as well.
Yeah, I think we're kind of taking, like, an agentic experience as part of GeoFlow, but we're kind of positioning ourselves to not be super opinionated right now. Like we said, like, there's a lot of changes going on right now, and we want to basically position ourselves to be ready to implement the one that we feel makes the most sense. And I don't think that there's any out there right now that I'm so bullish on that. Like, let's give her a heck. Let's build an entire agent experience around this. So the agent experience is probably going to be a little, flat for a little while as this stuff plays out. But I mean, if we were gonna, try to read the future a little bit, I would say that there's going to be a lot of this type of dynamic UI as kind of like the forefront of it. Because can you think of a better example than GIS for this though? I mean, where you're returning or you're asking a query to return some data and you need it visualized, or you'd like it visualized in a certain way. And that's just the use case for dynamic UI is almost no better.
Oh yeah, I mean, like, I need the like polygons of recent fire activity in this area, and then I need all my polls, and then can you, based on that, develop for me a risk map on your, or
Yeah.
wind of. I mean, there's you could dynamically generate things that would have taken a GIS professional like weeks to develop based on like all these different data sources, and you could just bring them together and dynamically generate a map. And
Mhm.
I think, yeah, there is not a better use case. I mean, you could try and make the argument that numbers or something lame like that, but not a cooler use case for dynamic visualization than this.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of where we stand as far as how we view AI and agents and UI, and kind of how we how we view it alongside GeoFlow, but I would guess that this is not going to be the last time we talk about AI, and it's I can confidently say that. So this will be an evolving topic, and yeah, I personally I wish we would have talked about it today, but maybe we can leave a link or something in the notes with Cloudflare put together with how they are going to approach tool calling in their workers, because that's pretty interesting. I think it helps add a little color to this, but we
It's a
don't have time for that
cliffhanger.
today. But yeah, it's a
Cliffhanger for
cliffhanger.
next. Yeah, it'll be
Yeah,
next week. But
exposing tools as JavaScript or TypeScript APIs. That's like the quick answer if you didn't want to look into it. But
too long, didn't read or didn't
yeah,
listen. Yeah. Yeah, but interested to hear what other people think. If you think the UIs are dead, or if you think that maybe there's more nuance to it, which I'm sure the guy who wrote this tweet probably thinks there's way more nuance and it's easy to set him up and be super opinionated. But interested to hear what people think. Interested to hear what people think on specifically GIS visualization and what you think of dynamic UIs, dynamically populated UIs, and how that'll all relate. So as always, if you want to give us your opinions, hop into our Discord channel or leave comments in the video down below. We'd love to hear from you, and feel free to sign up for those things to get updates on GeoFlow and what we're doing there.
big gulps, huh?
See you later.